The Princess of Wales has shared a portrait of herself that was taken by her son, Prince Louis, ahead of World Cancer Day. Her Royal Highness announced in January that she feels relief to now be in remission from cancer. Prince Louis has changed in a way no one saw coming, and it left Prince William and Kate Middleton in tears. He was always the playful one, making funny faces and running when he should have been standing still, unlike his serious older siblings. But suddenly, something about him is completely different, so different that even his parents couldn't hold back their emotions. What could have happened to make them react this way? Tune in because this shocking transformation is so extreme it made the royal family deny him a noble title forever. A prince unlike any other, when Louis was born on April 23, 2018, the world welcomed another royal baby with excitement. He arrived at St. Mary's Hospital in London, just like his brother and sister before him. His parents beamed as they introduced him to the world, believing he would fit neatly into the royal mold. But from the very beginning, Louis was a child who refused to be boxed in. While George followed the rules and Charlotte balanced elegance with confidence, Louis brought a completely different energy. He wasn't just playful, he was a force of nature. Before we dive into this, one thing is certain: Prince Louis's transformation is far more shocking than anyone expected, and what comes next will change everything you thought you knew about him. As a toddler, Louis was the kind of child who made photographers' jobs harder during family photos. While his siblings posed perfectly, he was the one with his tongue out, his hands in the air, or dashing out of frame. He had no interest in standing still. He turned even the most formal gatherings into his personal playground. His carefree attitude delighted the public, but behind palace walls, it presented challenges for his parents. William and Kate adored his spirit, but they also worried, how would a child so free-spirited handle the expectations of royal life? His antics became legendary during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. He stole the show while the rest of the family maintained a dignified presence. He was covering his ears, making faces, and engaging in antics that had the internet in stitches. The world loved it, but his parents knew that as charming as it was now, it wouldn't always be seen as cute. They saw glimpses of the struggle ahead, teaching their son the delicate balance between being himself and following royal protocol. But then something unexpected happened. The wild child began to change, slowly at first, little things. He started standing still for photos a little longer. His outbursts became less frequent. The toddler who once refused to sit through a royal ceremony without fidgeting suddenly seemed calmer. William and Kate watched in disbelief. The transformation became even more apparent during his last few public appearances. The once most unpredictable of the Cambridge children stood still during formal events. He waved politely instead of making silly gestures. His usual playful expressions were replaced with something far more composed. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. The child who once filled rooms with chaotic joy was now following the royal rule book. It wasn't just the public events. At home, Kate and William noticed a shift in his behavior. He was still playful, still curious, but something was missing. The loud, boisterous energy that once filled their household had softened. Kate found herself looking back at old photos of him running wild in gardens, laughing at the chaos he created. Now, she wondered if she had taken those moments for granted. William, always the pragmatist, reassured her that it was a natural part of growing up. But deep down, even he felt it. The days of chasing their youngest through the halls, his uncontrollable giggles disrupting royal meetings, seemed to be slipping away. The transformation that should have been a relief, proof that their son was learning and maturing, felt like a loss. For years, they had tried to prepare him for the responsibilities ahead, but they never expected it to happen so soon. What had changed? Had he simply outgrown his wild ways, or had the pressures of royal life finally settled in? Had he noticed the way people looked at him and decided, consciously or unconsciously, to change? The public, too, started to take notice. The same child who had once been the life of the party now seemed reserved. Was this just a phase, or was it something deeper? People whispered about whether he had been told to behave. Whether he had been warned that his antics were no longer acceptable, was this the price of growing up royal, learning to trade individuality for duty? Kate, known for being a hands-on mother, struggled with the shift. She had spent years advocating for a childhood filled with fun and freedom, for balancing royal duties with the joys of being young. Now, she was watching one of her children quietly slip into the mold she had once tried to resist. William, too, felt torn. He knew his son needed to learn discipline, but at what cost? Was he really growing up, or was he losing the spark that made him so special? Every child grows, every child changes, but for a child in the royal family, that transformation comes with added weight. His path was never going to be ordinary, but no one expected the shift to happen so fast. His parents had spent years navigating the fine line between tradition and modernity, and now they faced their greatest challenge yet, helping their son hold on to himself while still fulfilling the expectations placed upon him. The little boy who ran around at every royal event was about to face something new, a world that suddenly became quiet. The year that changed everything. Life in the royal bubble might seem polished and perfect, but behind the grand palaces and formal waves, reality plays out just like anywhere else. Take the Cambridge family in the year 2020, locked away at Anmer Hall, stuck in the whirlwind of a world that changed overnight. The grand royal engagements were put on pause, the formal outings cancelled, and suddenly it was just Prince William, Kate, and their little ones navigating the unexpected stillness of isolation. But while the world held its breath, one little spark kept their days lively, their youngest child, full of boundless energy and the mischief that only a toddler can bring. He turned the quiet halls of Anmer into his own kingdom of chaos and joy. For William and Kate, the sudden shift from a royal schedule packed with duties to full-time parenting was an adjustment, to say the least. Gone were the strict timelines and rehearsed speeches. Instead, they found themselves in a world of sticky hands, scattered toys, and endless chases through the garden. Their youngest, still too young to understand the gravity of the global situation, embraced every moment like an adventure. While his older siblings, George and Charlotte, had adapted to the new normal with a bit more restraint, he was a force of nature, refusing to let life be anything but fun. Kate, always the composed duchess in public, gave glimpses of their home life through virtual meetings, often sharing stories of how their youngest had turned their video calls into playgrounds of noise and laughter. Then came a rare moment that brought the whole country together, the Clap for Carers campaign. People across the United Kingdom stepped outside to applaud healthcare workers, a brief show of unity in a time of uncertainty. The Cambridge family joined in, standing proudly on the steps of their home, their hands clapping in appreciation. But the true star of the moment was their youngest son, with his tiny hands smacking together in a rhythm all his own and his expressive face stealing the spotlight. He turned what should have been a solemn tribute into a viral sensation. The royal charm had never been so unfiltered, and William and Kate later admitted it took several takes just to keep him from sprinting off mid-shot. Outside the cameras, life at Anmer Hall was all about discovery. With acres of land at his disposal, he became a miniature explorer, leading his older siblings through grand expeditions of leaf collecting, bug chasing, and general outdoor mayhem. Kate, having spent her childhood in the countryside, encouraged her children to embrace the outdoors, knowing well that muddy shoes and scraped knees were signs of a day well spent. While George took a more cautious approach and Charlotte enjoyed the theatrics of their adventures, their youngest was the ringleader, dragging them into whatever mess he found most interesting. Whether it was digging up worms or testing the limits of how high he could climb before a panicked adult intervened, he embodied childhood in its purest form, unfiltered, wild, and completely untamed. At home, the dynamic among the siblings was evolving. George, growing into his role as the responsible eldest, often tried to keep Louis in check, though it was a losing battle. Charlotte, confident and lively in her own right, found in Louis the perfect partner for spontaneous games that often left their parents shaking their heads. Kate and William made it a point to nurture these sibling bonds, fostering an environment where they supported each other rather than competed. But even the best parenting strategies couldn't tame Louis's natural inclination to push every boundary. If there was a line, he was determined to cross it. If there was an expectation, he was going to challenge it. And if there was silence, he was there to break it. As April rolled around, so did Louis's second birthday, an occasion that, like everything else, had to be adapted to the times. No grand party, no elaborate guest list, just the family, a cake, and, of course, the ever-present chaos of having a toddler at the center of it all. Kate, always wanting to capture the little moments, took it upon herself to document the day, snapping candid photos of Louis covered in paint, his face a masterpiece of bright smudges and pure joy. When the pictures were shared with the public, they resonated deeply. Here was a glimpse of royal life that felt real, unpolished, and full of the same delightful mess that every parent of a young child knows too well. As he filled the house with laughter and mischief, no one noticed how fast his childhood was slipping away. The royal toddler who stole the show. But as much as Louis was a source of endless entertainment, his presence also served as a reminder of how quickly time was passing. Kate, in her quiet moments, often reflected on how fleeting these years were. The baby she had once cradled was now a whirlwind of independence, a tiny person with opinions, jokes, and an endless supply of energy. She spoke to close friends about the bittersweet nature of watching children grow, grateful for every extra moment they had together but also painfully aware that these times wouldn't last forever. Even as the pandemic kept public appearances to a minimum, Louis's growing personality couldn't be hidden. Whether it was attempting to steal the show during family outings or making his siblings laugh in the middle of official portraits, he had an undeniable presence. William often joked that his youngest had a natural talent for stealing the spotlight, and those who followed the royal family couldn't help but agree. As 2020 came to a close, the world was slowly adjusting to a new reality, and so was the Cambridge family. The return to royal duties was inevitable, but for William and Kate, this unexpected time with their children had been a gift, a rare period where they could simply be a family, away from the constant scrutiny and expectations. By the summer of 2022, the world was ready for celebration. The Queen's Platinum Jubilee was set to be a grand affair, marking an incredible 70 years of her reign. The royal family, as always, took center stage, standing on the grand balcony of Buckingham Palace, waving to the crowds below. George and Charlotte, polished and poised, stood as the picture of royal grace. But once again, it was Louis who stole the show. While the others waved with the practiced elegance expected of them, Louis delivered a performance no one could have predicted. His exaggerated reactions to the Royal Air Force flyover, his animated expressions, and his unfiltered delight turned the event into an internet sensation. The youngest Cambridge had once again proven that no matter how structured royal life might be, some things like the boundless energy of a child could never be contained. The young prince stood between his parents, eyes wide as the sound of the jet roared overhead. His small hands shot up to cover his ears, his face a mix of surprise and discomfort. It was one of those moments that felt completely unplanned, a rare look at real emotion in the world of polished royal appearances. Kate and William exchanged amused glances while the crowd below showered attention on the smallest member of the family. And just like that, a single reaction from a child became one of the most talked about moments of the Jubilee. But let's not pretend this was just about a cute kid making funny faces. This was a carefully orchestrated event where every detail had been planned down to the minute. Yet no amount of preparation could control a 4-year-old with a mind of his own. His unfiltered reactions, his exaggerated expressions, his impatience, his complete disinterest and standing still for long speeches gave people something they weren't expecting: authenticity in a setting filled with formalities. His raw, unscripted behavior was refreshing. The stiff royal tradition couldn't hold back his natural energy, and the internet loved every second of it. At one point, he stuck out his tongue, much to the delight of his older siblings, who knew they'd never have gotten away with that. Then, as if deciding rules didn't apply to him, he began an animated conversation with his great-grandmother, the Queen. The cameras captured every second, and just like that, he wasn't just a royal, he was a symbol of what people often forget. At the end of the day, these are still just kids. The image of a tiny prince defying expectations, even in the smallest way, made him an unexpected star of the event. While the public focused on his playful antics, behind the scenes, his parents were balancing the chaos of parenting with the duties of royalty. For Kate, it was a delicate dance between encouraging her children to embrace their roles while allowing them to be themselves. She had spent weeks preparing them for the Jubilee, explaining the significance of their great-grandmother's long reign. But there's only so much explaining you can do before a child loses interest. He, in particular, wasn't interested in standing in one place for long, and no rehearsed speech was going to change that. What once seemed like playful fun was now something more. Louis was growing up and starting to see how much people were watching him, the prince who won't be forgotten. William and Kate later admitted that handling their young children during such a massive event was no easy task. It was one thing to prepare for royal expectations, but quite another to keep a restless 4-year-old entertained through hours of formal events. They had moments of realization, watching their youngest navigate a world so different from a normal childhood, wondering how much of this he truly understood. It was bittersweet seeing him grow into his role, yet knowing the freedom of childhood would never quite be the same for him. The Jubilee weekend passed in a blur of royal appearances and public admiration. Social media exploded with posts about his lively behavior. Some called him a breath of fresh air, while others joked about how every family has that one child who refuses to follow the rules. Memes flooded the internet, turning him into an icon of childhood mischief. The royal family, often criticized for being too distant, suddenly felt more relatable. People weren't talking about the carefully curated speeches or the elegant fashion, they were talking about a small boy who just wanted to have fun. The warmth and genuine reactions from the public didn't go unnoticed. For Kate and William, it was proof that moments like these, unfiltered and unexpected, mattered more than anything else. Their children weren't just royal figures, they were real kids growing up under the world's gaze. And for their youngest, the Jubilee wasn't just another royal event. It was his first real introduction to the role he would grow into, whether he liked it or not. As the summer of that year faded, life returned to its usual routine for the Cambridge family. But something had changed. The child once seen as just the baby of the family had stepped into the spotlight in a way no one had anticipated. With each passing day, it became clear he wasn't content to just follow in his siblings' footsteps. He had a personality too big to ignore, and he was ready to make his own mark. Months later, another moment confirmed this transformation. The family's Christmas walk at Sandringham was a tradition, an event watched by the world. This time, he wasn't just following along, he was fully engaged. Dressed in a carefully chosen coat, holding onto his mother's hand, he walked with confidence. He waved at the crowd, accepted flowers from admirers, and seemed far more aware of the attention he commanded. This wasn't the same restless toddler who covered his ears at the Jubilee. This was a child who was beginning to understand his place in the public eye. Kate, always observant, watched her son with a mix of pride and quiet sadness. She had seen this before. George and Charlotte had also reached this stage, the point where innocence started shifting into awareness. But with her youngest, it felt different. Maybe because he was her last baby. Maybe because his wild spirit made it hard to imagine him fitting into the rigid expectations of royalty. But there he was, proving that he was adapting, whether she was ready for it or not. At home, these changes were even more obvious. His curiosity and energy didn't fade, they just found new outlets. He spent hours outdoors, exploring the countryside near their home. He climbed trees, chased after animals, and found joy in the simplest things. Unlike his older siblings, who had always been more measured in their actions, he was fearless. If something caught his interest, he ran toward it full speed. If he had a question, he asked it loudly. His parents often found themselves both exhausted and entertained by his limitless enthusiasm. One rainy afternoon, Kate walked into the kitchen to find he had turned the table into a full-blown art station. Paint covered his hands, streaks of color covered the surface, and a proud smile stretched across his face. When she asked what he had made, he declared it was the best painting in the world. And in that moment, Kate realized he might grow into a prince, but he would always have that spark, that unfiltered joy that made him different. His transformation wasn't about following in anyone's footsteps. It was about carving out his own place in a world that often demanded perfection. He had shown the world who he was in the most natural, unguarded way possible, and people had loved him for it. What the future holds for him is uncertain. He will grow, he will change, and he will face challenges unique to his position. But one thing is clear, no matter how much royal protocol tries to shape him, Louis will always be Louis, a child who, despite being born into one of the most scrutinized families in the world, refuses to be anything but himself. Did Prince Louis's transformation happen naturally, or is there something behind the scenes the royal family isn't telling us?